Weekend retreat. Republican leaders huddle at Camp David to plan their 2018 agenda. We preview it from the White House. Out of commission. We look at the president's decision to disband a group looking into 2016 election voter fraud. VA Secretary David Shulkin. In part 2 of our interview, the Veterans Affairs Secretary talks the importance of spiritual support. And birth of a tradition. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley visits the Italian town credited with hosting the first nativity scene. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, January 5th, 2018. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump huddles with Republican lawmakers at Camp David. They're forming their 2018 game plan. One issue on the docket, welfare reform. White House correspondent Mark Irons has more for us tonight. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Jason. This is an issue you'll be hearing more about as the year goes on, with passionate voices on both sides of the aisle. President Trump says people are taking advantage of the system, and the White House says the goal of welfare reform is to get the country back to work.
We will lift our citizens from welfare to work.
President Trump months ago revealing one of his key agenda items for 2018, welfare reform. White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney said a shift in thinking is needed.
We're no longer going to measure compassion by the number of programs or the number of people on those programs, but by the number of people we help get off of those programs.
I spoke with White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah this week, who says the number of people on government assistance is at a record high. He says the White House focus won't be on cuts to entitlement programs, but allowing states to set their own welfare qualifications. He says job markets are varied across the country, and state-by-state reform can be tailored to help the unemployed get back to work.
Again, we're going to Camp David with a lot of the great Republican senators.
The timing of when to push for welfare reform will be discussed this weekend at Camp David, but getting Democrats to support any changes won't be easy. That's Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's concern.
The sensitivity of entitlements is such that you almost have to have a bipartisan agreement in order to achieve a result.
Welfare reform isn't the only topic at Camp David this weekend. The White House tells me the president also plans to discuss immigration reform, military funding, and infrastructure, among other 2018 priorities. Jason.
Lot to dissect. Thanks, Mark Irons at the White House. And stocks are soaring. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Thursday burst through the 25,000 point mark just 5 weeks after its first close above 24,000. President Trump celebrates. He tweets, Dow goes from 18,589 on November 9th, 2016 to 25,075 today for a new all-time record. Jumped 1,000 points in the last 5 weeks. Record fastest 1,000-point move in history. This is all about the Make America Great Again agenda. Jobs, jobs, jobs. $6 trillion in value created. The new tell-all book, Fire and Fury, claims chaos inside the White House. It comes out earlier than expected. The publisher says it's all because of unprecedented demand. President Trump says the book is phony and full of lies. It was a busy week for the president with the stock market, North Korea tweets, and fallout from the new book. One thing that might have gone under the radar has to do with election fraud. President Trump disbands his Commission on Election Integrity, saying many states wouldn't provide basic information. Critics say the fraud investigation was part of a campaign to make it harder for poor people to access the ballot box. And we're now joined by the Heritage Foundation's Hans von Spakovsky, who was on that now dissolved commission. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Is this a big loss for the country?
I think it is. You know, the whole point of this commission, as prior presidential commissions, was to take a look at our voter registration and election process and to see what kind of problems are there, and if there are problems, recommend solutions for both state governments and the federal government.
But are there problems? Is there really voter fraud going on in this country?
We have a database at the Heritage Foundation where I work that's now up to 1,100 proven cases, voter fraud convictions from around the country. It could particularly make the difference in close elections, and we have close elections all the time.
There was one in Virginia this last week that
That's
was
right.
decided by putting two names pretty much in a bucket and pulling out the name of the winner.
Right, and there was a report earlier this year that in that district, one of the cities there, Newport Beach, had recently taken off several hundred non-citizens from their voter rolls, non-citizens who had cast ballots in prior elections.
Non-citizens.
Non-citizens.
So they're not eligible to vote.
They are not eligible to vote. In fact, it's a felony under federal law for them to do that, and yet they were on the rolls and casting votes.
How does this happen in this country?
Well, that's one of the problems we were looking at. One of the issues is that election officials don't really do very much to verify the accuracy of voter registration information. One of the things they don't do is check to make sure that people really are U.S. citizens.
I know I live in Maryland. I can just go there. I'm registered, but I can just go
Right.
there and show up. I don't have to show anything.
That's exactly right.
I know there's a study out of the University of Loyola, Los Angeles, and a professor there found from 2000 to 2014, he investigated 1 billion votes were cast, and he said only about 31 known cases of impersonation. Is this really an issue, though, for this country?
It is an issue. He says 31 cases of impersonation fraud. We've got 1,100 cases in our database because that's not the only kind of fraud. There's all kinds of other things people do, from double voting to non-citizens voting to absentee ballot fraud. And we've got cases like that from all over the country.
Double voting, I know in Chicago there's always a joke, vote early and vote
Right.
often, but is this, people are actually casting two ballots? How is that happening?
We have a number of convicted individuals in our database, and what they were convicted of was registering in 2 different states and voting in the same election. You may recall just a couple of years ago, a candidate for Congress in Maryland named Wendy Rosen had to withdraw from the race after it was discovered that she was registered in both Florida and Maryland and had voted in elections in both states at the same time.
So really quick, what does the government need to do right now to investigate these issues now that the commission's disbanded?
Well, the reason it was disbanded was because we couldn't get a number of states to provide us with the data we needed, their statewide voter registration list, to start researching this. So it's going to be tough for the federal government to look at this. One of the things they ought to do is the Department of Homeland Security should look at non-citizens, people who've applied for citizenship, and see how many of them have actually illegally registered and voted.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it very, very much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And Attorney General Jeff Sessions launches a review of how courts are handling immigration cases. The Justice Department will review a little known but widely used practice. Administrative closures are when immigration judges close cases without decisions. This allows people to stay in the country without legal status. The DOJ says in President Obama's second term, 180,000 cases were closed without a decision. And the president's Camp David meeting will also tackle immigration, a hot-button topic he brought up yesterday with GOP lawmakers at the White House.
If we have support from the Democrats, I think DACA is going to be terrific.
President Trump also tweeted, "Thank you to the great Republican senators who showed up to our meeting on immigration reform. We must build the wall, stop illegal immigration, end chain migration, and cancel the visa lottery. The current system is unsafe and unfair to the great people of our country. Time for change."
I'm hoping that we're going to try to work together for the first time this Congress in a bipartisan way. And if we can, this might be the way to do it, among other things.
That was us speaking with Alabama Senator Richard Shelby yesterday on Capitol Hill. And a possible breakthrough between North and South Korea. South Korea confirms the countries will talk on Tuesday. It's their first high-level contact since 2015. Within the past few days, North Korea reactivated a hotline with South Korea and has used it several times. A suicide attack in Kabul, Afghanistan kills 20 and injures 27 security forces. No one has claimed responsibility for last night's bombing, but both Taliban insurgents and the ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan have earlier targeted the country's security forces. Catholic leaders in the Democratic Republic of Congo say police surrounded 134 churches. It happened during last week's protests against President Kabila, whose term was set to run out in 2016. A church report shared with Vatican News Agency says police arrested 6 priests and a seminarian. We're learning Pope Francis will meet privately with groups of indigenous people during his visit to Chile and Peru. The group had suffered persecution. The Vatican says the Pope wants to hear the reality directly from the source. The Holy Father's trip is right around the corner, January 15th through the 21st. And the Pope makes a surprise visit to a branch of the Vatican's Children's Hospital outside Rome. He visited kids and babies and comforted their parents. The visit was part of his Fridays of Mercy, first started during the Jubilee of Mercy. And 6 church leaders speak out against Pope Francis opening the door for communion for some so-called remarried divorcees. In a letter called Profession of the Immutable Truths About Sacramental Marriage, 5 bishops and a cardinal say in part the spread of these ecclesiastically approved pastoral norms has caused a considerable and ever-increasing confusion among the faithful and the clergy. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. A cardinal today joined 5 bishops in what they call a public and unequivocal profession about the truth of sacramental marriage. What exactly does this mean?
Well, Cardinal Pujats of Riga in Latvia, he's an emeritus archbishop, has joined these 5 bishops really because they're concerned about the Pope's endorsement of what they say is something that goes alien. It's alien to the Church's tradition and faith regarding giving communion to divorced and remarried. They say it weakens the indissolubility of marriage, and they say that it's really not consistent with the Church's teaching. In fact, they say it's totally alien to the Church's faith and tradition. So they've issued this what they call profession upholding the immutable truths of sacramental marriage.
And their document goes through and lists biblical citations and also letters from previous popes as well. And it was issued on the Feast of the Holy Family this year.
That's right, yes. And there is talk that others will join. There's quite a wide body of opinion, but they haven't really spoken up. But you have had various initiatives over the past year or so, or longer. Priests, for example, signing a document asking for clarification. And you've had, of course, the Dubia cardinals who've issued 5 questions asking the Pope for clarification. So this is just the latest event in this whole issue.
So then what exactly do you think Pope Francis is expected to do in response to these concerns raised by the bishops and a cardinal?
Well, I think the most likely thing, Jason, is that he'll try and ignore it. This has been the procedure so far, hoping that it will go away. The Dubia cardinals, as many viewers will know, were never really acknowledged for their initiative. There's been general ignoring of any of these things, and I think that's probably going to continue. There is concern that the Pope might send an apostolic visitation or something to the Kazakh bishops, the 3 bishops who started this procedure, this profession, but we'll just have to see. But I expect probably it'll be ignored.
Okay, well, Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jason.
Coming up, let us pray. The Holy Father's January prayer intention aims to help an area he recently visited. And the VA and faith.
For us to be successful, we need to be working closely with faith-based groups and other groups in the community.
Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin talks the importance of pastoral care.
Que luchan por no renunciar a su identidad religiosa.
The Holy Father's special prayer intention for January, religious liberty in Asia. In a video posted online, the Holy Father prays that Christians and other religious minorities in Asian countries may be able to practice their faith in full freedom. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Lauren Ashburn. Veterans Affairs says it's taking suicide prevention seriously. Here's how seriously. It says it's examining 55 million medical records from 1979 to 2014. Those records will be used to develop and evaluate suicide prevention programs in every state. Yesterday, Lauren Ashburn spoke to VA Secretary David Shulkin.
Joining us now is Secretary of Veterans Affairs, David Shulkin. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's talk about some clinical priorities. Suicide prevention is probably your top priority. In 2014, this is actually a really shocking statistic, an average of 20 veterans died by suicide each day. The risk for suicide was 22% higher among veterans compared to the U.S. civilian population. How worried are you about this?
This is why it is our top clinical priority. It's a statistic that you just really can't ever begin to accept. We do know that when veterans get care in the VA system, that we save lives, that those numbers come down dramatically. But the majority of those 20 veterans a day are outside of the VA system. They're in the community, and my fear is they're just isolated and not getting help.
How do you get them?
Well, what we need is we need help from everybody. This is not just a VA problem. We need to reach out to our faith-based groups. We need to reach out to our not-for-profit organizations. We need to reach out to family members and friends. And when they see people that are increasingly being isolated, depressed, hopelessness, to be able to reach out to them, they need our help to connect them with people, professionals who know how to help people who are suffering like that.
Opioids play a role in this high rate of suicide, particularly opioid abuse, because of the pervasiveness of chronic pain among these veterans. Has the VA fueled the opioid crisis?
I think in the past, yes. Now we have to change the way that we're addressing pain and change the way that we're addressing prescribing these narcotics and opioids. And we've begun to do that. In 2010, the VA launched a national opioid safety initiative. We've seen a 36% reduction in opioid use since that time.
Since 2010.
Yes, and we still have much more work to do, and we're implementing new changes all the time.
Let's talk about that faith connection that you referenced earlier. You have awarded $343 million in grants to about 300 nonprofit organizations, like the Knights of Columbus, which also helps fund this program. How much do you rely on those faith-based groups to help veterans?
They're absolutely critical. For us to be successful, we need to be working closely with faith-based groups and other groups in the community that to be able to help veterans be able to achieve their goals in life. These are community-led initiatives and not government-led initiatives. I used to define health as a physical issue, and in the VA, we define it very differently. Of course, it's the physical health of a patient, but also the psychological, the social, the economic, and the spiritual, and really looking at this holistic approach to people's well-being and achieving their life objectives is the model of care that we deliver. So having a veteran's spiritual connection and their faith be part of allowing them to achieve their life goals is a critical part of the way that we look at care in the VA system.
One last question before we go. It fascinates me that now you are talking psychological, social, economic, and spiritual. What does that mean, that you are focusing on the spiritual part of a veteran?
Well, you know, for me, getting to work so closely with veterans, you begin to understand what motivates them. And these are people that have really raised their hand to put their life on the line for the country. They believe so strongly in that they're willing to have the ultimate sacrifice if necessary. And that's why we enjoy the freedoms that we have. And when you start thinking about why people do that, this is a fundamental, deep faith in themselves, families, country, and God. And putting all that together, you realize that these are extraordinary people, that you have to use the strength that they've brought to their jobs to help them achieve their life's goals. Our pastoral care staff is a critical component of us achieving our mission.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
you.
you.
We really appreciate your time. Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, David Shulkin.
Thank you. Great.
And our thanks to Lauren Ashburn and VA Secretary David Shulkin. The Department of Veterans Affairs has help ready to go if you or a veteran you know is thinking of suicide. You can call the Veteran Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 800-273-8255. Or you can visit their website at veteranscrisisline.net. Up next, a warm welcome. Canadians flock to see a popular saint's unusual relic. And Away in a Manger. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley examines the origins of the nativity scene. The church today celebrates the feast of St. John Newman, a 19th century bishop who became a U.S. citizen. He was born in the modern-day Czech Republic, studied in Prague, then came to the United States and was Bishop of Philadelphia. Glad to have you with us. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. A relic of St. Francis Xavier, his right arm, begins a 2-week tour of Canada, and reports say it's expected to be viewed by 75,000 people. The relic makes 14 stops, including in Nova Scotia, home of Francis Xavier University. The arm is famous because the saint used it to baptize hundreds of thousands of converts. One organizer in the hockey-loving country says it's like having the Stanley Cup come to your tournament. And Pope Francis prepares for a busy weekend, the end of Christmas. And you can see his masses Saturday and Sunday right here on EWTN. On Saturday, the Holy Father celebrates the Feast of the Epiphany. Mass will be broadcast live from Rome at 4 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll show it again at noon. And on Sunday, the Pope celebrates the Baptism of our Lord. Mass from Rome begins at 3:30 in the morning, or you can catch the replay again at noon. Orthodox Christians in Belgrade prepare for Christmas, and in accordance with the Julian calendar, the Orthodox Church celebrates the birth of our Lord on Sunday. The traditions in Serbia include Yule log branches and wheat. And finally tonight, nativity scenes are a well-known part of the Christmas tradition. But what is perhaps less well-known is the very first nativity scene was created by a greatly beloved Italian saint nearly 1,000 years ago. Our Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley takes us on a trip to the tiny Italian town where it all began.
Located in the mountainous heart of Italy, the town of Greccio, once a medieval castle, dates back to the 10th century. Its ties to Christmas were forged in the 13th century when a holy friar named Francis, known as the Poor Man of Assisi, passed through this valley on his way back from the Holy Land. Father Domenico, a local Franciscan friar, tells us St. Francis was struck by the breathtaking beauty of the countryside, which reminded him of Bethlehem.
Francesco aveva un desiderio, il desiderio di...
Francis had one dream, he says, to relive with his own eyes what baby Jesus suffered for humanity. And this dream came true on Christmas Eve when he asked his friend Giovanni, the owner of the castle, to prepare what was needed to create a creche. And so, in some nearby caves, Francis of Assisi created the world's first nativity scene. And since then, every Christmas, the town's residents relive the first Christmas. Even Antonio, the town mayor, takes center stage. The mayor telling us the Christmas story is part of Greccio's history and something that unites everyone here. Today, the live nativity includes local characters like St. Francis himself, played by 43-year-old Deputy Mayor Federico, who has been a part of the living creche since early childhood. My name is Federico, and in the nativity scene I play St. Francis. I've been representing Francis for 8 years, he tells us, and I've been taking part since I was 6. His friend Natalino has been taking part for 8 years and plays a wealthy onlooker. He calls it a great experience and is delighted to be part of Greccio's historic connection to the birth of Christ.
Pope Francis came to Greccio last year during the Christmas season, and it was a surprise, private visit, but one that was steeped in symbolism. The Franciscan-inspired pontiff visiting the very spot in which the first creche was brought to life by none other than his very own namesake. In Rome, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
What an awesome story. Thank you, Juliet, for bringing us that story at the end of this Christmas season. And that wraps up our show for the week. We'll be back Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Jason Calvi. Good night and God bless.